I'm JJ Perez from Inside Runner Sports. Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News, coming to you the day after opening game 2024 season. The Roadrunners down Kennesaw State 28-16 in a game that featured two wildly different halves of football. Greg, I don't know where you want to start, but man, that was an interesting week one game, wasn't it?
Yeah, it got very interesting there towards the end. I was very surprised to see it became a one-score game in the fourth quarter because even up until that point, as long as UTSA had a double-digit lead, I think I was willing to look past a lot of the little slip-ups or mental
Right.
mistakes, you want to call it, that led to the game being a little bit more competitive than you probably thought. Because I think part of it, there's like the human nature part where I think how quickly UTSA went up 21 points and just seemed like they could score at will. There is a little bit of human nature. Like these guys can't stop us, and they probably let off the gas a little bit. And I think that could be part of it. And then I'm sure as we go through this, we'll break down maybe some things that we noticed that were different that kept the offense from clicking at as high of a level the whole game. But the defense was outstanding really from start to finish. And I don't want to read too much into that group because it's such a different kind of option attack that they're up against that they won't see very much through this year or ever. I guess with Army and Navy in the conference, they have to be a little bit good at that sort of thing on a more consistent basis. But I don't want to draw any kind of huge conclusions about the defensive side based on just what we saw in this matchup. But I think that generally speaking, if they can clean up some of the things that we saw on the offensive line and in the penalties and things like that, I think there's still a lot of reason for promise about this team because Owen McCown I thought was great really from start to finish.
Yeah, let's start right there. I guess let's look at the first half. We saw UTSA score, man, kind of at will, their first three possessions, right, over all the way into the second quarter. And I mean, that offense looked pretty much unstoppable, right? Owen McCown got the start at quarterback, kind of the worst kept secret there that Jeff was
Right.
kind of trying to keep from everybody. But I mean, he looked good. It wasn't, I don't think the offensive scheme was overly complex, and he kind of took advantage of what they were what they gave him, and the connection with McEwen there is something I think is going to be there all season long.
Yeah, I'm still watching it back. I think you can see right there. There's
Yeah,
like a minute in the second quarter, but on the first couple drives, the part that was going well, it seemed like they were working the screen game quite a bit.
right.
And even when they got downfield a little bit more, it was a couple of those were the fake screen plays where they kind of look like they're going to screen and then the guy leaks free up the sideline and they hit two of those for pretty big gains that were really the most significant signs of downfield passing. I know that was one of the things that Jeff Traylor said after the game he wanted to see more of was some of that ability to be explosive and stretch the ball down the field, which they really didn't do for the most part. I mean, they had the big screen, they had the big swing pass to Robert Henry, which it's a good play by Owen to sort of find him and know that he's the open man that you can make the read to in that scenario and that he would have some running room there. And then it was interesting because the one downfield pass they hit was the deep ball to Willie McCoy.
Yeah,
And the interesting thing is that he wasn't particularly open. It was
yeah.
just kind of the scenarios that you saw Frank take all the time with some of the bigger receivers that UTSA used to put out there that it's just if it's a one-on-one matchup, you can kind of throw it up there and trust them to make a play. And Willie McCoy made that play and went back and got it. So I wonder if there's, as they watch the game back with Owen, if there's going to be more instruction to take some of those shots because he hit such a high percentage and obviously his yardage total was great, but he was very willing to take some of the short passes when they were there for him. And I don't know if he waited as long as he could to potentially find something develop down the field or to take a shot down the field that might have been open, but that's something the coaches and he would know better than I would from what we get to see and just from what we saw yesterday. So I think that they're going to have to figure out if they want to stress pushing the ball down the field more or if they're okay with working the screen game and the short passing game. But obviously, generally everything Owen did, I thought looked pretty clean.
Yeah, I thought he played well. I do think the second half was a little bit different because of maybe some of the breakdowns with the offensive line. I know we saw a few guys come clean, and it looked like I have not rewatched it, but it looked like Kennesaw State was doing some stunts and different things up front, and maybe confused the offensive line. I guess just wrapping up here with Owen, how would you grade the way he came out, to start this season? I probably lean towards a B plus, B minus, kind of in that area. Um, I thought he was kind of as sharp as what you could expect to start a season.
I'd give him an A or an A minus. I thought he did a
Yeah,
lot with the running game as well. Kind of, he scored on that one play and was willing to, it's hard to say. I try to look at like the quarterback's eyes and if he's checking a lot of different guys on the field. And I don't know that so far I've seen a ton of different going through a bunch of different reads, but he did have enough patience that if that first one or two reads wasn't there, he could go to the legs as sort of an alternate read that could create some things for the offense. And he was pretty effective in the times that he did that. I know he didn't end up with a great rushing total because some of the sacks. And to your point, I think there was some miscommunication up front on the offensive line. CJ James starting at center, I think maybe there was a couple times either he got called for a false start or sort of maybe some issues with starting the play led to a false start by somebody else. And I think there's probably just we've seen enough of him in his other stops to know that he is a good football player. I think there's probably just some communication and chemistry with some new groups that probably still has to get worked out. So I wouldn't expect that to be an issue long term, but it's something to keep an eye on. But with Owen specifically, I think because of some of those issues, maybe he which I was just talking about a second ago. Maybe that was why he was probably more willing to dump off some of these short passes or to look to get the ball out of his hands quicker than he might have needed to, which could have hurt the ability to develop the downfield passing game. So it'll just depend as the offense cleans up that protection. If Owen then takes his time a little bit more, and if that leads to some more downfield passing, and you would like for none of these things to be issues against a team like Kennesaw State, but it's just kind of stuff you have to work through early in the season, I suppose.
Yeah, do you think this game was as close because of the mistakes? Like it seemed like there were maybe a handful of critical plays that did not go the Roadrunners' way that took points off the board, and if half of those go the Roadrunners' way, then you're looking at a much different outcome, right?
Yeah, it doesn't take much to mess up a drive. I mean, one of them ended because there was a holding penalty on a screen pass, and now you're at, 2nd and 19 or whatever. And then there was the one where Kavorian Barnes fumbled, which we could talk about that more if you want. He had a couple fumbles early last season and then kind of got it, worked out. I don't know if there's a thing with him where because they don't tackle in practice that he's like got to adjust to the physicality of the game, or if it's just a little lackadaisical with that part of it early in the season. But it's like 3 years in a row, all of his fumbles are in the first couple games. So there might be something there, or it could just be, something random that happens in a small sample like that. But so that derails one of the drives. And then I think there was I can't remember there was another weird circumstance that crippled one of the first half drives, and I can't remember what it is now. But generally, I don't think it was things that were sort of systematic issues. Now in the second half, which I still haven't gone back and seen yet, it did seem like there might have been something was wrong that even like 3-and-out situations, like it wasn't, there's nothing that I think you could draw up and say this was the reason for that. There might have been one or two penalties in there, but generally they just weren't moving the ball very well. And that was the part where I don't know that there was one particularly weird play that stuck out to me. I think it was like a 3rd and 8, and it looked like an option play where an RPO where Owen could throw the screen out to the left. And it seemed like there was 3 UTSA guys and 3 Kennesaw guys. And with that much open field, you'd probably take that one. But he handed it off to the dive on 3rd and 8, and it didn't get there.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think it was like a 2-yard gain. And so maybe there's just some maybe decision-making stuff, whether it's pre-snap or right at the snap that is still being worked through with the new quarterback, or maybe that was the right read and I just don't know what I'm talking about. So, all of that is in play. But I think that we can talk about the offensive line. I know it's a concern for a lot of people, but generally it felt like they kind of got a hat on a hat. They just have to sort of set it up to go where the numbers are.
Right.
And so maybe just some of whether you want to look at the play calling part of it or whether it's just Owen kind of getting them in the right situations, I think it's at least worth considering that could have been a factor. If I was a coach, I could tell you, I'm just sort of speculating that maybe that's something to think about.
Do we have to be worried about the run game or the lack of production in week 1? I think that was maybe a function. It looked like they were maybe stacking the box and maybe for daring UTSA to throw over the top, and because of kind of what you all mentioned there, that they just decided to maybe dink and dunk most of the day and try and get what they can out of that.
Yeah, I see that along the same lines. It's just they have to be putting themselves in good run situations or setting up the play to run to an area of the field where they have those numbers and that they have an advantage there. Because I really think, I mean, there were one or two scenarios where I saw whether it was Corey Godinet or Venley or CJ James at center where they just kind of might have got beat one-on-one up, but that was pretty rare.
Yeah.
Generally it seemed like it was because guys were coming free and something wasn't communicated correctly. So I would say that as long as they're able to put them in situations for the run game to thrive, I think there's enough faith in the talent. Like Kavorian Barnes on that first drive, we talked about how he was coming in a little bit lighter and he looked really good running the ball. And then after he fumbled, I don't think he got back in the game again, which is probably when you have that many running backs, I think you can kind of afford to send a message like that if that's what you want to do as a coaching staff. So, and we know that all those other guys are talented. We saw Will Henderson in our first glimpse of him showed the speed that makes him really dangerous, and he could be the fourth or fifth back, which is that's crazy. So, not particularly worried about the run game yet, but I guess it bears monitoring. Are you worried about it?
I'm not. I just it's like you said, I think more than any unit, the offensive line needs time to kind of come together as one piece. So, hopefully all those guys stay healthy and they start to see some of that next week. And I mean, besides Kavorian and the fumble watch, I guess the early season fumble watch, I'm I'm sure they'll right the ship there. I want to ask you about McEwen because I want to say that was the quietest 11 catch game, maybe, right? Because you look up and it's like, man, this guy is having a day. Like, and wasn't that long ago where that was a historic day at UTSA, a career game for him. Man, he's by far the number one receiver on this team, isn't he?
Yeah, and I thought I was really impressed. I mean, I know it's Kennesaw State, but when he got the ball in his hands on some of these screen passes, he looked pretty dangerous in terms of
Yes,
the juke moves and things like that. He was able to put on people, and I don't remember a ton of that last year. I'm sure it was in there somewhere, but he looked when he says he comes, everybody says they come back bigger, faster, stronger, but he looked pretty dynamic moving with the ball, which I thought was really impressive. And generally, I think it comes down to that connection with him and Owen. They're both these Texas guys, and I think they went to high school about 15 minutes apart. And so over the summers, they said they would get together and have these different, passing and catching sessions. I think Chris Carpenter was involved in that a decent amount too. So perhaps that chemistry is just there when you're talking about some of these things that might get adjusted at the line, because you do see Owen kind of pointing things out and making some adjustments. And I think that's the kind of thing where a guy that you have that much experience with and that level of comfort with, and obviously from a talent perspective, you're very comfortable with what he can do too, that if you kind of give him an assignment that sets him up to succeed, that he's going to be able to execute it. So I think we could see that connection pretty regularly this year. And it was certainly a good first sign of that.
let's run through the defense real quick. I know we don't want to read too much into it because this is kind of a gimmicky offense and they're not going to see it that much. But I do think there were a handful of guys that played really, really good. And I'll start with Owen Pee-wee making the start there at the money backer.
Yeah, I guess we can talk about the surprise absence of Danye Taylor. I don't think we
Yep.
know anything yet about how long he'll be out, but it speaks to I was just kind of marveling after the game yesterday about the just the level of talent and the job that they do recruiting and kind of how they've built the roster, that it seems like this happens all the time where when a guy goes down, you find out that the third guy who is now getting the second guy's amount of snaps is actually pretty
Pretty
good too.
good. Yeah.
That happened with Marcellus Wilkerson. I was really surprised to look at the stats. I think he only ended with 2 tackles. It felt like he was all over the field. And I know he played a lot of snaps too. So um, generally, I don't think you got to worry about that. It seems like that was one of the spots, that outside linebacker position, where we mentioned we were a little bit unsure behind Jamori, but we knew we had two guys that we could count on as as the spectators we are on the other side there. And they both played well. And then I think we didn't see much of the guys behind Jamori. I was trying to think about if we saw any James Wally. I know he was out there a little bit, but generally they have, even with Danye out, 3 guys that they can count on in terms of those outside linebacker positions.
What'd you think about the inside linebacker positions? Obviously, I thought Brevin Randall played great. I don't know what happened on that one play with the hit out of bounds. I guess there was a lot of trash talk and physicalness there in the second half, but we saw Martavius French get in the game, which I thought was a little bit of a surprise, and I thought he played well too. And Jamal Liggin is Jamal Liggin. He's an all conference level player, so pretty good group, I think there, all things
Yeah,
considered.
I think it was Blackshire on the late hit. I don't.
Yes, you're right.
He
Yes,
he played a little. He didn't play a ton, but we saw those 3 guys that you mentioned. It was the Brevin Randall got the start, and then Jamal Liggin got the start, which is very expected because he's the guy with the zero and the guy with the helmet communication device. We'll see him out there quite a bit, but generally, Martavius French didn't play that much fewer snaps than them, and I think those 3 rotated pretty frequently. So all 3 of them are proven players at different stops. Obviously Brevin Randall's doing it here for the first time, but we've seen French and Ligon do it in a UTSA uniform for a little bit now. So I think that there's nothing to really worry about with that group either. I think you can be pretty confident there. We didn't see a ton of. We saw a little Blackshire, like I said, and we didn't see a ton of Ian Jackson. I know he only played a couple snaps. So, but those guys seem like in a moment, they could step in and do a pretty good job too, at least situationally. So yeah, they're really stacked at that position.
Yeah, I was impressed by how the secondary played as a whole, specifically the safeties. I don't think the corners were tested as much, and it was hard to kind of get a gauge of what they did. But I thought Ken Robinson and Elliot Davidson played great, and we saw Jimmy Wyrick make maybe the play of the game in the fourth quarter with that forced fumble. So I think a pretty good upgrade there in the secondary for the Roadrunners this season. Looks like.
Yeah, that was a huge play by Jimmy to make the fumble there to get the ball back at a time when that was the only part where the game was really in any kind of danger.
Yep,
Where
in the
Kennesaw,
balance.
they had the ball down one score. It was the only time in the game they had that, and it lasted 2 plays, I think. So that was an important play to swing the momentum there, and then for UTSA to drive down and kind of put the game away, I think was really all she wrote at that point. But yeah, to your point, I would think in an option attack like this, the safeties have a very different kind of responsibility where they're more accountable for somebody coming out of the backfield or swinging around the formation rather than making sure they don't get beat deep or, just kind of being that safety blanket at the back end. So generally, we saw them coming downhill and making a lot of plays in the backfield. I think I'm looking at it now. I know Ken Robinson had a pretty, substantial tackle for loss, and Davison didn't get one in the stats, but it felt like he came up and made some plays that were near the line of scrimmage that were pretty impactful. So I think both of them, like I said, you are going to have to play Army and Navy at some point. I know, Army's on the schedule this year. So that's a situation where you have to have guys who can understand who their responsibility is and then be in a position to stop that guy when he gets the ball. And I think they've proven that at least at their level, they can do that pretty well. And I mean, all the other levels look pretty comfortable with it too. We did not see, I don't think, a lot of like missed assignments or
No,
or
no.
totally guys running free or that kind of thing, which that's really where they make you look bad is if you one guy can be out of position and they can take it for a long touchdown.
Yeah, I was super surprised with Davison's physicalness, I guess, and I think that he made it a point of emphasis to try and work on that this offseason. So I think yeah, I think that's going to be a pretty good asset for the Roadrunners, and then we'll see how they look in coverage, I guess as soon as this week. But what did you think about the play of the defensive line? It looked like they ran maybe six deep, seven, eight maybe at times. I don't remember a lot from them, which is maybe good, right? I mean, they pretty much stymied that run offense for most of the
Yeah.
game, and I think Jeff Traylor said he thought they felt they were dominant as well as they could be. So, pretty good week one from them overall.
Yeah, the last thing I think I watched before I came over here, you have a gif of it, was Brandon Brown made a pretty big play in the backfield
Yep.
and then had a little celebration there as he does. So I think he had a strong game and showed up a lot. I was actually surprised looking at the snap counts that Christian Clayton and Jamie and Buxton, they both played more snaps than Joe Evans, which you wouldn't have thought they would. And maybe Joe got banged up at some point in the game briefly or something. He still played a pretty normal amount, but it speaks to their confidence in those guys and Chad Otutu and even Damian Wimberly, who's more of a pass rusher from the edge kind of role, but those guys were right behind there in that mix as well. So they talked about how they were still going to try to rotate a lot of guys, and I think they still did, and all of them sort of stood out at different points where I would watch on TV here and say, "Oh, what number was that? I got to go. Who was that guy? No, it's Otutu, or oh, it's Wimberly." And so I think those guys all had an impact, and I think if there was some concern about the depth on the defensive line, maybe it's a little bit less now, but we'll have to see it against a different kind of offense and a different level of competition too. But I mean, as promising as you'd hope for in a first showing.
What what do we think happened with special teams in week one? Because it seemed like it was a combination of different things. Like you had two missed field goals. They weren't easy field goals, but they were certainly makeable. You had some lapses in punt return, right? And UTSA has a special teams coordinator that's kind of been a knock, and I think it's the same coach who's kind of been doing it this whole time. So is it just kind of a week one glitch, or is there an issue there?
Yeah, I don't know. The punt return was pretty glaring initially, and hearing Jeff explain it after the game made it feel a little bit more understandable
Right.
that punter has typically not had that kind of a leg, and so Chris Carpenter standing back there and he expecting one thing, and then he's got to drift back 20 yards and go get it. And when you're standing at the 25, expecting that's where the punt's going to land, you're probably not even thinking about I'm at the 3 yard line now. And it's not like he fair caught it at the three. I think he would have had a ton of room to return it if he could have fielded it and stayed on his feet. So again, I think you just kind of always let that one land and it's going to go into the end zone like 100% of the time. But generally speaking, I understand what he was thinking and probably lost track of himself on the field because you're just not expecting the guy to kick it that far. So that sounds like an excuse, but I just don't want to panic about that because we've seen him do this job for a long time and at a pretty good level. So, and if not, they have other guys who've done it
Yeah.
for a certain period of time and at a pretty high level as well. So that's not something I would expect to linger. The field goal thing was the one that was, I don't know if alarming is the right word, but it Chase Allen was really good last year, and it felt like everything went right on these kicks, and he just didn't hit them well. And so I guess anybody could have a bad day, or there could be something going on there that we're not aware of. But Jeff mentioned the communication with the holder, and I didn't take a great look at the second one, but I know I watched the first one back, in the building after it happened on the little ESPN Plus deal. You can rewind it, and I mean everything about the operation seemed normal to me. I was like, did somebody get a hand on this? Like, what happened with this kick? And to be, I'm not saying a high 40-yard field goal is easy, but for him to miss it like off the mark and short is just not what we've come to expect from him last year. So I don't know. That's going to be something to keep an eye on, but maybe it is just as simple as something with the timing and the operation that I know those guys are pretty precise in their routines, and it's something that we might not see with the naked eye. So, give them a chance to work out the kinks, I guess. But
Yeah.
that was something certainly I think we should keep an eye on going forward because that was pretty significant.
A lot of the fan base woke up this morning on Sunday, the day after the game, and probably left the Alamo Dome not feeling real great about their Roadrunners. Greg, just kind of wrap this thing up. What would we grade week one? I mean, it's you got the win, you did some good stuff, you had some bad stuff. I mean, C plus, B minus, like where I probably lean towards a C plus.
Yeah, I think I would feel worse about the game if it happened in reverse. Does that make sense? Like
Right.
if they were horrible out of the gate and then they got it together, it'd be like, why did you guys start so bad? But I understand starting as strong as they did and then having some natural inclination to let up when you go up 3 touchdowns in the second quarter, and then it's probably hard to flip that switch again and get it back on. So I would say I guess the bottom line, you do have to put it, they missed out on covering by about 13 points or so. So they were probably 2 touchdowns worse than what people expected, which hard to give that any better than a C. But um, I think there's a possibility that next week against Texas State, they come out and play like the first quarter for all 4 quarters. And it's funny because if you're, I think most of the angst with the fan base was knowing that that game's ahead and how important that
Yeah.
one is.
Yeah.
And who knows if some of the players were thinking about that game too, and if the coaches were thinking about that game as well, and if that sort of hampered some of their preparation or ability to play at the highest level in this one for 4 quarters. But I think it's funny because when you're leaving the game as a UTSA fan, you're like, wow, we're not ready for Texas State because you have this preseason idea of what Texas State's going to be. By the end of the night, Texas State's thinking the same thing because
Yeah.
they also jumped out. I think it was 15-0. And then at the end of the game, Lamar's got an onside kick that they recover, and they actually are in a position to tie or win the game. So it's pretty bizarre that both teams against competition they should be much better than delivered a hot start, and then a lot of things that gave their fan base causes for concern. And I honestly think I think penalties were an issue in both games too. So it's an interesting parallel that they're both kind of now in the same spot. And isn't it funny that it would come down to which coach can make the better
Yeah.
adjustments when there's this history between the two of them, with Traylor and DJ Kinney having the level of connection that they do. So it'll be a fun matchup, I think.
Yeah, for sure. The Roadrunners and the Bobcats renew the I-35 rivalry this week. Maybe as not maybe the biggest matchup in the history of the series because of what it could mean. The neither team can certainly clinch a CFP spot, but they could certainly lose one, I think, this week. And um the games don't come bigger than this, don't they, Greg?
Yeah, I got to get my group of five rankings together after this,
Yeah.
but it didn't seem like a lot of teams were super impressive. They're
No.
either like against some FCS competition or against some teams that are considered lower than them. Even Rice, who I thought might have a pretty good season, ended up losing, and so um, yeah, I guess it just sort of it's still early for everybody, I guess is what I would
Yeah.
say. So this game will matter a lot on the resume at the end of the season. Both teams would hope because that means they both had pretty good years and they look like a good win on the other one's slate, but. We'll just have to see who can make the adjustments. Everybody says week 1 to week 2 is when you make the biggest jumps, so we'll see who makes the bigger jump because they're both kind of, it seems like, in the same spot at the moment.
Yeah, I do think this is about as equal as both programs have been in the series history. So I feel
And
like
they're
we're
both of them are at as high of a level as they've ever been too. So that's the fun part about it is not only are they on even footing. They're on even footing at as high of a level as they can get to. So that's or as they've gotten to this point. I don't want to put a ceiling on them,
Right.
but
As of Sunday, the Bobcats are 2 point favorites, and you usually get 2 or 3 points for being the home team. So pretty much a toss up for this week. Greg, anything else? Anything else to wrap this one up, or what are the hot takes heading into this week?
I would just say I was a little surprised by that line because I like to look at the S&P Plus rankings, and those are usually a pretty good predictor in terms of the point margins of where those spreads are going to fall. And I think UTSA in the preseason ones, they haven't updated yet. We're about like 8 points ahead of
Yeah,
Texas
I
State.
would have said 5 or 7.
So the fact that UTSA had that margin on them, and then they both played at about the same level, and now Texas State's a 2 point favorite, even if you factor in home field, it just seemed like that gap would be, either it would be a pick 'em or UTSA would be favored, and we'll see how the line moves through the week, and there might be something in or even how the rankings change through the week, and whether I'm kind of my analysis is just off there. But I was a little bit surprised by that. I thought people might be surprised to see that UTSA is favored because I do think that sort of the common public opinion is that the line would land about where it did. So, but I mean, I guess that's what they're setting it for, right? They want to match what people think and then get the equal action on both sides. So
Yes.
maybe what I'm saying is if you can get UTSA at plus money right now, you might feel pretty good about that. But I don't want you to hold me to that one.
Yeah, for entertainment purposes only on that advice.
Well,
So
in certain states, in certain states.
all right, Greg. Well, that'll wrap it up. We'll see how UTSA came out of week one injury wise, right? There were a few guys that got banged up. A pretty gruesome injury to Jaren Randall. We'll try to get an update on him tomorrow and see what's the story with the money linebacker position there. There's obviously something going on. I think we saw David Abendar was also inactive, and a handful of guys it seemed like got nicked up, but nothing too serious. So
Yeah, thankfully for UTSA's sake, I think CJ James only missed 2 snaps for as bad as that injury looked like it might have been and how long he was down on the field. And then Denver Harris as well. It was kind of an awkward thing where
yeah.
it looked like if it looked like based on the way the contact was that it could have been like a neck or concussion thing, but it was pretty clear that it ended up being something with his arm or hand or wrist or whatever it was. And he came back pretty quickly too. So it seems like the two guys who are, very significant starting and contributing players who have a big role in their respective units are both theoretically fine. You never know how that sort of shakes out the next day.
All right, Greg, I appreciate you taking the time. That'll wrap it up. JJ Perez from Inside Runner Sports, Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. We'll be back throughout the week to preview UTSA Texas State, and we'll be
Will we? We
back.
do preview shows now?
No, no, no. I meant in our respective websites,
I was gonna say. Okay.
expressnews.com,
I just don't get the people's home
insiderunnersports.com.
topics. They're just gonna
And
delay.
then we'll be back next week following the game to recap. So until then, we'll see you guys. Thanks for watching.
Later.